What can we expect from the Habs this postseason?
Well, here's what I would say, Jay. There's no way they're going to beat the Toronto Maple Leafs 4 games. I don't even think they can beat the Maple Leafs 1 game.
Stripped to the puck, and Gallagher on the counter, along with Stahl, scores! Brendan Gallagher skyward after missing a good setup. Here's Suzuki, scores! Tipped in front in the series. Empty net, Tyler Toffoli scores, and it's 3-0 Montreal, and they'll punch their ticket to Winnipeg.
What a game. What a series comeback by the Montreal Canadiens. And to break it all down, I'm joined by a very special guest in Julian McKenzie. So my guy, thank you for being here today.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, man. It's kind of funny to be back on the Press Box Hat-Trick podcast. I can't remember the last time I was on here, but it's an absolute honor to be back on the show and to be on with yourself. Congratulations on being the new host of the show. You're carrying on an established legacy. Dude, congrats.
Thank you. So I guess the best way to introduce somebody in 2021 is to mention that they're verified on Twitter. Am I wrong in saying that?
Is that the best way to introduce someone in 2021? But once we start getting doubled up with the vaccinations, I start going to barbecues. Is that what it is? Yeah, this is my grandmother. She's not verified on Twitter or none, but she's still real cool. Oh, that's my cousin. He's verified on Twitter. I don't know if that's the best.
In the virtual world, I mean, that's pretty much all that matters right now. So, but aside from that, Julian is an associate editor for The Athletic. He's a host for Hockey Inside Out. He's the co-host for both the Waterboys podcast, which is a Watch Mojo production, if that matters. He's also the co-host for the Scrum podcast with our very own Tristan D'Amour. And he is also the host for the Yahoo Sports Hockey podcast, which is all great. That's all great. But maybe
technically I make appearances on that podcast. Justin Cuthbert is the actual host. I'm just like a special guest. I mean, I guess more not special guest, it's more just like recurring guest, I guess. But I'll give credit where credit is due.
Okay. Thank you for correcting me on that. But maybe perhaps the most important thing is that Julian, with the help of Tristan D'Amour and Vince Morello, helped create the Press Box Hat-Trick and gave idiots like me a platform to voice my opinion about sports. So thank you for that.
Well, we've been talking for 5 minutes. I don't know if that's enough for me to call you an idiot yet. You're not an idiot.
You'll see, hopefully. Well, anyways, last night's game was fantastic. Wall-to-wall, perfect performance by the Canadiens. Their best performance of the series, in my opinion. Price made 30 saves. Eric Stahl had 2 assists. That came out of nowhere. What was your biggest takeaway from last night's game?
It's more like a takeaway from a good chunk of this series, and that's that the Canadiens' quote-unquote top line of Philip Deneau, Brendan Gallagher, and Jake Evans in this case, and was Thomas Tatar earlier on in the series, they did some amazing shutdown work of the Leafs' best players in Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews, and the Canadiens probably don't win the series without the help of those 3 forwards and the work on defense of Ben Sherratt and Shea Weber. And the craziest thing about it is, Phil Deneau, who, entered the post-game media availability with all the swagger he could possess in the world, with the pizza box and the pizza slice and all that. Mm-hmm. I just made me think of how in the regular season there was so much talk about his contract status and the reports going out that he had turned down a $30 million deal in the offseason. And at different points in the regular season, a lot of people made much ado about his lack of goal scoring. We know Philip Deneau as a very good defensive forward, but because of the fact that he was unable to put the puck in the net, and I think he only ended the season with 5 goals, we all made a big deal of the fact that he could not score goals. But in this series against the Toronto Maple Leafs, that didn't matter because of the work that he was able to do in shutting down, again, the 2 best players for the Toronto Maple Leafs, 2 guys who were top 5 in scoring, and at least in the case of Austin Matthews, a top 3 player in the National Hockey League. Phil Deneau, as far as I think he only had 1 assist and it came on the Tyler Toffoli empty net goal in the deciding Game 7. So it was just funny that for much of the year, a lot of Canadiens fans and even media members just made a big talking point of how Phillip Danault is just that guy who's not going to produce for you offensively. We made such a big deal about that. And people started asking, oh, well, is the play of Jake Evans going to make Phillip Danault expendable? And after a series like that, if you're Phillip Danault and you're going back to the negotiating table with Marc Bergevin or with any other GM for that matter, you're going in with two things. You're going in with the stat sheet for Austin Matthews and the work that you did on him in the playoffs, and just a clip from Nathan McKinnon on a podcast, which I don't listen to, where he says Phillip Danault is like essentially the league's most underrated center because of the work that he does. So I think a lot of praise will go to Carey Price and a few other guys on that team, but Phillip Danault deserves a lot of praise for how he handled two of the league's best in this series.
I agree 1,000%. A lot of the casual fans, I consider myself a casual fan as well. I'm more of a basketball guy, but we don't really recognize Phillip Danault's importance to the team. You know, I was watching like all these games religiously, the playoffs, but I didn't really follow that much in the regular season. And he stuck out to me for sure because Matthews, Marner, they're making a combined, $21 million. And as soon as it turned, 3-1 for the Maple Leafs, they had a combined 2 points for the rest of the series. So that it could be slightly a choke job for the Leafs, which I think it is.
It's not slightly. It's not slightly. It is. It's a total choke. It's the worst choke job in recent memory for this team. A lot of people can look at the series losses they had against Boston in Game 7s and all of that, and you can at least say, if you're a Leafs fan, the Leafs at least weren't favored to beat those Boston teams. It was heartbreaking for them to lose the way that they did, but the Leafs weren't favored. They also weren't favored to beat the Washington Capitals that one year as well. But this is a team, the Montreal Canadiens, the Leafs should have beaten going away.
Oh, yeah.
They should have beaten them in 4 or 5 games. A lot of people, a few people like had it in 6 or 7. I had it Leafs in 7, but I don't know. If you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, man, after a series like that, you have the best players going into this series. You have the best team on paper. You have the best team in the division. And you come out with not just losing the series, but an epic collapse.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many questions you have to ask. It's very much a full-blown collapse for this team.
Yeah, we got to do that Reggie Miller thing, you know, the hands on the major choke.
You went there. Damn.
Do you expect anything less from the Leafs, though? I mean, dude, we got to be.
They make it hard on themselves, but I definitely thought that this year of all years, they'd at least win a round. I don't know. So a lot of people were quick to kind of ship them through to the Final Four. I would have liked to have seen what they could have done in a series against the Winnipeg Jets or even the Edmonton Oilers with Connor McDavid. But, I mean, the Montreal Canadiens, I did not expect them to be the speed bump that ultimately caused their car to just disassemble once they went over it. That's pretty bad for the Leafs, and there's a lot of questions that they're going to have to ask themselves, the players, management, everybody. I know a lot of Leafs fans who are very close to just being done after what they witnessed in Game 7. It's pretty dire over there, but yeah, that's what happens when you don't get the job done in a 7-game series against a team you're supposed to beat.
Yeah, well, nothing makes me happier than seeing the Leafs collapse once again. But let me tell you,
a lot of people are happy about that too.
Yeah. Let me tell you something that I noticed from last night's game. After the first 6 minutes of the game, I was watching it with my boys. I told them the Habs are going to win this game. It was still 0-0 at that point. But you know why I said that? It's because Carey Price, if you let him get into a rhythm, he'll eat you alive. The first 6 or 7 shots that the Leafs had, they were floaters. Weren't even nobody in front of the net, didn't even challenge Price. It got him locked in. And then from there on in, you're in for a long night if you're the Maple Leafs. And they were done. They were done. I knew it. I turned to my boys. I said, the Habs are going to win this game. Price is locked in. I turned out to be right.
Yeah. The craziest thing is, and no one's brought this up at all. I think it was brought up briefly during like the broadcast, but like, do you remember like at the very like early stages of that game? Like Carey Price, as the game was starting, he wasn't ready. Like his back was like turned to center ice, and he was like still setting up. And then he turns around, he's like, "Oh crap!" Like the game started.
That.
Like I think the broadcast they were saying like, "Oh, well, Phil Deneau should have looked back at him, or whoever was starting should have looked back at him, or the referees should have given him the signal." Like there was the possibility that the Leafs could have started off and caught Carey Price by surprise. The fact that that happened and he just was very much dialed in, that's just a testament to how cool Carey Price is. And I'm still stupefied at all the people who entered this series, all the pundits, all the journalists, all the fans who thought for a moment that the Canadiens would not start Carey Price, or that the answer was to not start Carey Price ahead of the series. This guy, when he's healthy, can play like among the best goaltenders, if not the best goaltender in the world. And he gives the team the chance to win every single night that he plays when he's healthy. So, yeah, I think a lot of people, especially in Montreal, are going to be eating a lot of crow, not just with how they predicted this series would go for the Leafs, but also how they thought it would go for Carey Price.
Especially Craig Button. Got to mention that. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. So we touched upon this. Is this more of a Leafs choke job, or do we got to give the Canadiens some credit here?
You can do both. You can say that the Canadiens deserve a lot of credit for how they battled back in Game 5 and 6, and how they played in Game 7, especially in Game 5 and 6, where they started the game well. They went off to big leads, and then the Leafs had to dial it in and come back in the third period, and mistakes in overtime ultimately cost them against the Canadiens. But Game 7, I'm still surprised at how the Leafs started that game. I thought, you're at home, you have the fans in the stands, and you don't play well. Mitch Marner even mentioned it, I think, after Game 6, that this team had a problem starting on time, and they didn't fix it in Game 7. Yeah. And even if the game was still 0-0 after the first period, the game still being in the Leafs' favor, that second period, once the Canadiens got those goals in, you knew the Leafs were going to have to play from behind, and they still struggled to score up until about 90 seconds left in the game. It's very much a failure. And again, you have a 3-1 series lead against a team you should be beating going away, and you fail to close them out. It's very much a choke job, but you can also give credit to the goaltending, the defending, the fact that the Canadiens were able to get timely goal scoring when they really needed it, with the fact where they were able to get some greasy goals in front of the net. The play of some of the younger guys like Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Nicole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki. You can credit those people, but I also think the Leafs there's no reason why they should be in the position that they were in. If they were firing on all cylinders, and I understand John Tavares was not available to them after Game 1 because of the horrific injury, they still brought it up to a 3-1 series lead. Like, the Leafs should have won this series.
Oh, yeah, easily. I totally agree. And Mitch Marner should not even be allowed to voice his opinion after the way he played in this series. Let's get that out of the way.
Sheesh.
He was awful. He was
lost.
He was floating.
He made mistakes. I mean, he floated a puck out of the ice as a puck over glass penalty, which is one of the worst mistakes of this series. Looking back at it, man, a lot of people are questioning what this Leafs core is going to do, and a lot of people are looking at Marner in the future, and a lot of people are going back to that summer where he essentially asked for a lot of money. He got the contract he wanted, and it seems as if in the postseason he hasn't lived up to it. His last 3 postseasons, including this one, have all ended with him amassing no more than 4 points.
Right.
That's not good enough for a player of Mitch Marner's caliber. And while everyone's focusing on Mitch Marner, the attention, I think, at some point also has to go to Austin Matthews as well, because the guy who won the Rocket Richard Trophy for most goals, or he's going to eventually win it because of the goals he was able to tally up this year, 1 goal through 7 games, plus he was able to get all those shots off despite all the defensive work by the Canadiens. That's unacceptable.
Right. Well, you hit the nail on the head right there. Everyone was like making fun of that William Nylander contract when he first signed it. But I think he was their best player throughout the entire series.
He was.
It wasn't even close. So I think that contract's looking a lot better than the one that they gave to Mitch Marner right now.
And if the Leafs are in a position where they have to trade someone from that core to get some pieces to fill out the rest of their team, that contract looks a lot more appealing to other teams as opposed to a Mitch Marner contract in a flat cap era where, because of the pandemic, I don't think a lot of teams are going to be able to really spend unless they're able to get other teams to retain salary and all that. And it's a bit of a difficult time. So if the Leafs want to go all in on a trade that they think is going to change up the franchise, they're going to have to. William Nylander's contract might be the easiest one to swallow, but again, in a flat cap, there's a chance a lot of teams might not even be in a position to accommodate that contract without having the Maple Leafs, do some things in return to kind of ensure that things could be financially stable. So the Leafs are in a tough spot. I feel like they have to do something, but they're also in a very tough position.
Right. So I also want to touch a little bit upon Dominique Ducharme, the interim head coach of the Montreal Canadiens right now. Does this series win guarantee him a job for next year?
I think it's tough to say. I wonder how his team will play up against Winnipeg. I definitely think his chances improve after beating the Toronto Maple Leafs, even if you look back at some of the decisions that he made in that series and remark them as questionable. I still think he deserves criticism for not playing Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Cole Caulfield to start off the series when they looked at different points as the team's most lethal offensive players, for what it's worth. I'll say that I'm not going to go out on a limb and say that Dominique Ducharme will officially be back. And I've seen a few colleagues say, like, yeah, you know what, like a series win like that, that's pretty much enough. I'll say that his chances of staying as the actual head coach for next season have gone up significantly after being the Toronto Maple Leafs. And to that effect, I think Marc Bergevin's chances of staying on as general manager for next season have also gone up as well. I mean, you see the way he interacted with Carey Price after the game. That looked like a guy who looked very relieved just about a lot of things, including his job security. That's the happiest I've seen Marc Bergevin look probably since the beginning of this season. He's looked stressed ever since.
Oh, yeah. Yep, guaranteed. And on the other side of the spectrum, for the Toronto Maple Leafs, what do they do with Sheldon Keefe and Kyle Dubas?
What can you do with those two? I don't see anything happening to either of those two.
Really?
No. I mean, maybe next year it's like the, last chance for Keefe, or who knows. But, and I know a lot of people were critical of Keefe's decisions, but the players were there. It's funny. There's a lot of instances where we look at a team and they might falter out of the playoffs, and a lot of blame will go to the general manager for the construction of this team, or the coach for how he deploys the players or deploys certain strategies. And those two guys deserve some blame. But I don't think the Toronto Maple Leafs were necessarily that much of a cup contending team in comparison to other teams. But I definitely think they should have been able to get a win in the playoffs. And considering the performances of some of those top players, I put a lot of onus on those guys. And I think Kyle Dubas did as best as he could to construct a roster that should at least be able to compete. It was good enough to win the regular season. And I understand the regular season doesn't matter when it comes to the playoffs. But if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, I don't know. I think with the way the roster was done, people were saying it was like the best roster they had compiled in like 2 decades. And you come out of it without a round win. I mean, how much blame can you really put on Kyle Dubas? And again, it's not as if they matched up against Tampa Bay in the first round and lost. It's not like they matched up against Carolina or Colorado or Las Vegas. They matched up against Montreal, a team that they had beaten like 7 times out of 10 throughout the regular season, and a team that, yes, they have depth. Yes, they could be good defensively when they really need to be. They can't score. They can't score as much as they can. So I don't know. I think if you're the Leafs, like, there's a lot of gut checking that's going to have to happen with the players and management and coaching too. But the players really need to look within themselves, because there's no reason they should be in a series like that against Montreal and lose.
Yeah, well, I'm right with you on that one. I'm definitely all for keeping the players accountable and placing the blame on them because the coaches are not the ones playing. They can only do so much at the end of the day. But throughout the game, Sheldon Keefe looked like he was expecting to get fired the next day. Like it was a meltdown. It was a meltdown, and you can't fire the players. You need a scapegoat after a meltdown like that. So
you can
that's
trade
why
them if you can. You
Yeah.
can if their contracts are up, you can let them go to free agency, and that's probably what's going to happen with a bunch of players. I want to just specify on the thing you mentioned with Sheldon Keefe and the way that he might have looked.
Yeah.
I wonder if for the Toronto Maple Leafs leading into Game 7, I remember just like looking at social media and seeing all the fans of the Leafs and listening to podcasts and listening to all these different like audio clips and whatever. If you were to take the pulse of the collective Toronto Maple Leafs fan base, it's a combination of like exasperation and deja vu. Like they've gone through this before, and they were all just kind of expecting to lose. Like we're going through this again.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time believing that mentality didn't seep into the players' minds. Like when players say like, oh, they try not to pay attention to media and stuff like that, that's BS. Like there's no way they don't see that stuff. Fine, maybe they don't read Steve Simmons in the Toronto Sun, but they definitely check their Instagram and see what's being posted about them.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if like the mood in Toronto, which didn't seem all that pleasant and positive going into Game 7, just kind of crept into the minds of a lot of these players. And just they didn't approach Game 7 with the idea that they could win. It was just more like, oh man, how do we find a way to not lose this Game 7 and have all these nightmares reoccur again and again and again, like what's happened to them in series past? I think that plays a huge role. And I think that's a big reason why they didn't go out to a great start in Game 7. Again, at home in front of like over 500 healthcare workers. This was a game that they should have at least taken it to the Canadiens from the jump, but they did not. So that's why the Toronto Maple Leafs are going golfing, and the Canadiens and the Jets are going to play each other in round 2. And I still can't believe that's going to be the case, but here we are.
Yeah, and speaking of that, I want to move on to that next series, and I want to ask you what you think of the Carey Price versus Connor Hellebuyck goalie matchup.
That looks really enticing. We could be in for a really good goaltenders duel, and I can see both teams playing defensive at different points as well. And if you're in for it for like a high goal scoring affair, it might not be the series for you. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is just my view, and especially with the way the Canadiens have been scoring at different points in the playoffs, this could be a series that has a lot of 2-1 or 3-1 or 1-0 games or anything like that. I'd be stunned if we got like a game in the series where it was like 6-5 or like 7-4 or something. I know a lot of flack goes to the Winnipeg Jets for the way they're built defensively. But I think like a lot of their forwards, the work of their forwards up front is also going to contribute to how they shut down the Canadiens at different points. Like for Phil Deneau in that line, they had to deal with the top line of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they pretty much said, all right, we're going to have to let everyone else beat them. For the Winnipeg Jets, their top 6 at least is pretty balanced between like Pierre-Luc Dubois, Nikolai Ehlers, Mark Scheifele, Blake Wheeler, Paul Stastny, Kyle Connor. That's a really good – I mean, after seeing what the Leafs have gone through, if I'm the Winnipeg Jets, I'm puffing my chest out and saying we have the best top 6 in the league. And then you look at the bottom 9, guys like Andrew Kopp, Adam Lowry, just to name a few. They have guys in their forwards who can bump and bruise with some of the best of anyone in the North Division, and maybe they can hang in with some of the other teams across the NHL. And I think that's going to play a role. I think we could be in for a physical defensive series between both teams. I don't think a lot of goals are going to go down, but I think we could be in for some pretty scintillating goaltending performances between Carey Price, who maybe he's a little past his prime, but he's shown that in the playoffs when it matters, he's able to play. And Connor Hellebuyck, who's won a Vezina Trophy And for that last stretch of the season for the Winnipeg Jets, he was arguably the thing that kept them held up. You know, there was a stretch where they weren't necessarily playing all that well and they were going on losing streaks, but Connor Hellebuyck was trying to hold that team together while they were going through some stuff. So we could be in for a pretty tough series between those two teams. I think the Jets might still have the advantage because of the way the roster is constructed versus the Canadiens. But if the Canadiens find a way to lock down some of the other team's best players, it could be a lot closer than people anticipate. And we could be in for another long series, like 6 or 7 games.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that Carey Price was a little bit past his prime, and I would agree with you. But Brandon Gallagher recently said that Price has been the best that he's ever looked. And keep in mind, Gallagher's been on the team for, 6+ years now, if my math is correct.
Yeah, he's been there quite some time. Yeah, at least since 2013, 2014, 2012, 2013, I think.
Yeah, so
if memory serves.
Yeah, so what do you think of Price, of that comment? Like, has he looked the best he's looked in that amount of time, in that span?
Yeah, this is the best he's looked all year.
Yeah.
The thing that surprised me about the Canadiens at the beginning of the season was that the Canadiens were that first month of the year, we'll say, they were scoring goals. At one point, they were averaging almost 4 a game. And I know a lot of them came against Vancouver, but they were scoring goals. But what was surprising about it was the fact that they were winning all these games off the goals and they didn't have to rely on Carey Price, who didn't necessarily look, like the Carey Price that a lot of Montreal fans and even media expect to see. And that's what kind of led me thinking, okay, the Canadiens look really good because they look as if they could be a team that doesn't necessarily have to rely on goaltending to keep them alive. And then you go through the year where Carey Price, whether he just wasn't healthy or whether he just was tired or just trying to get himself to the playoffs to get himself in that zone, he did not look ready. He did not look good. And a lot of people started kind of jumping into the Jake Allen bandwagon and thinking, hey, he should be the guy to start. Not that Jake Allen wasn't a good goalie, not that he wasn't serviceable, but Carey Price has proven when he's healthy and he's on his game, there are very few goaltenders in the NHL who are worth putting in the net as opposed to Carey Price. So Carey Price getting to play all 7 of those games for the Canadiens, I thought in almost every game he played, he was as solid as he could be. Even the 4-0 game in Game 4, where the Leafs just were all over the Canadiens. I mean, maybe that's the worst game for Price in that series, but it's not as if all 4 goals he allowed were terrible. Maybe 1 or 2 he'd love to have back, but I think you could fault the Canadiens for so many other things. But I think Carey Price, for the most part in that series, played solid, not overly flashy, but when he had to be flashy, he very much delivered with some highlight reel saves. He did enough for the Canadiens to win that series. So, yeah, he's playing the best hockey he's played all season. I know with the state of goaltending now, they just released the Vezina finalists. Maybe Carey Price isn't at that same level now, but Carey Price, at least in the playoffs right now, he's playing the best he's played all season. The Canadiens really need that right now.
Yeah, he's definitely turned it on. He's turned up to a new level in the playoffs for sure. And just to finish it off, I want to ask you, what's your prediction for this series against the Winnipeg Jets? And why?
I said Leafs in 7 last time. Who cares if I'm wrong this time, I guess. But I'll say Jets in 6. Okay. I mean, I like the fact that the Canadiens can go into a series with the Jets on the high that they've been able to put on with their victory over the Toronto Maple Leafs. But I'm really big on the way the Winnipeg Jets look, man. I think with the attack that they have, I know the defense could be a little bit better. But I mean, I don't think it's as bad as some other teams. And the goaltending, ultimately. They have some pieces that can at least carry them out of the North Division. And yes, the regular season doesn't matter that much, but I think that if the Canadiens start getting in, I mean, obviously they're in playoff mode. They're they go back to some of the different styles that they were able to play, just being patient and grinding. I don't see the Winnipeg Jets cowering or taking wild penalties just to take wild penalties to try to overcompensate for the physicality. I think they can bump as well with the Montreal Canadiens when it comes to being physical. It's just that I think I trust the Winnipeg Jets top 6 forwards to score more. And even if Phil Deneau, let's say he ends up going up against like a Mark Scheifele line, or I don't know exactly how the top 6 might be aligned, but if Philip Deneau is going to go up against one line, that other line for the Winnipeg Jets might be able to take advantage of like a Toffoli Suzuki line and put up some points.
Okay, well, I definitely can't fault your logic there. You definitely know a lot more than me. But I'm going to go against you right now, and I'm going to say the Habs in 6.
That's fine.
Let's hope that happens.
It could be like 2010. It could be like 2010. Oh, your Vegas jersey just fell off. That's fine.
That's the cue.
That might be like a metaphor for the Golden Knights against the Colorado Avalanche, because right now after Game 1, it's looking like the Harlem Globetrotters versus the Washington Generals, man. So, yeah. But hey, it could be like 2010 too, where the Canadiens had no chance against the Capitals. They win against the Capitals. They beat the Penguins in round 2, and they end up against the Flyers in round 3. It could easily be like that.
Hey, it's Carey Price is having that type of run. Maybe it could be like Yarrow Halak. Who knows?
Man, that's a name I haven't heard in quite some time.
That was my guy back in the day. Love that dude. Well, anyways, Julian, my guy, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're a busy man. You're a superstar. Hopefully we could get you on soon.
Hey, man, thanks so much for having me. It's a big honor to be back on a Press Box Hat-Trick podcast. Dude, congrats again on being the host of the show. Best of luck with the direction you take it in. And, yeah, dude, let me know when you want me back on, man. It would be great to be back on.
Definitely. This was great. Thanks, Julian.